Good morning and welcome back to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, James Splitsuit Sweeney, joined as always by Chris Warren. Chris, how you doing today?
Doing really good. How are you doing, James?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for asking. So today I want to have a conversation about studying. Now, obviously, we are a poker training site. We really applaud studying. We think it's very, very good to do to make better decisions at the table and really make sure that we maximize our between session time. And this is something that's been coming up a little bit more often on the Red Chip Discord. It's kind of this conversation of what should we be studying, how to study best, and I thought this would be a really good conversation to have. This is something that I've talked a lot about over the years, and I suspect we're going to always be talking about this to some extent, just because studying, especially if you're outside of college or you're outside of academia, you're not really doing much like hardcore study in your day-to-day life. So this might be one of those things you kind of have to get back into, and improving the skill set is incredibly important. So talk about kind of how you think about studying in poker, or maybe if you want to talk about an example outside of poker first, whatever's easiest.
Yeah, I would say in general, the kind of just the preparation process for doing any type of sort of advanced activity is something that I feel like people in general, just in my interactions in the business world and the poker world, they really don't like it. It's not the fun thing. And I would say that for me, my biggest difference is I'm able to kind of find the fun in the preparation, in getting ready, like being able to bring my best self to the table, whether it's a business meeting or at the, for my check raise range or whatever it may be. I think the biggest problem people have is that they're not having fun with it in some way. And I guess for me, maybe the competitive side is where I really lean, where I'm like, I want to smash these noobs and show them, and like, don't want to make any mistakes, and I want to be perfect and all that. And I have that drive. So I kind of tap into that when I'm studying. I'm curious for you, what's your drive for study? Because I feel like you've always been a very good studier as well.
I appreciate that. So I've kind of changed my mindset on studying over the years. I mean, in high school and college, it was all about just smash as much knowledge into my head as possible a few hours before the test, just absolutely vomit it out on paper, and then, I don't know, ask me by lunch that day anything about what I just studied, and I'd have zero idea. So, like, it had nothing to do with recalling things long term. It was all about short term regurgitation, and that worked just fine. I mean, I think academia kind of like applauds that type. But as soon as you're out of academia, like, you need to have longer term recalling of really whatever you're trying to study. So for me, it was really important to start developing that skill set. How can I start recalling things better long term? So the biggest thing for me was changing my mindset around study into having fun with it and getting into a headspace of not like punishing myself with study. I know some people kind of look at studying as like kind of a punishing thing, but something that I get to do, a perception of like enjoyment. I get to spend this time studying something that I enjoy, and maybe it doesn't make me much money right this moment, but in the long run, as I stack all these studying sessions on top of each other, I am accruing more knowledge, and as such, I'm going to be able to make better decisions at the table. I like doing that. I like making money. These are all things that kind of work for me. So it's kind of a perception shift from like, this sucks, studying is terrible, it takes a bunch of time, to awesome, I get to do this, and by doing this, good things will happen in the long run.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I actually never thought about the fact that I do genuinely look forward to studying now, because it's like, it's almost like creative time for me, because I get to reach inside and think like, okay, like, what are the areas of the game that I need to work on? And then it's just like this very tangible problem that I'm like brainstorming or getting help from others or getting help from training or whatever. Like, have a very targeted mindset where it's like, okay, I am upgrading. I'm going to move from using, 100% or fold combos in my preflop range to, a board coverage range. And I want to see what the value of that is. And then it's like, I can go ask people, I can go buy some solutions, training, etc. Pay coaches. It's like a very fun process for me. Even in the business world, I remember, because I was a sort of high-level project manager, I would often just go buy like an hour of an expert's time, and it would be like $200 an hour. Sometimes it got up to $500 an hour. And I found it just so effective to go like work with the best person in the world, but have a very like fast, quick, targeted way to go about it. And yeah, it was just really fun. And I think I've noticed that pattern in other successful poker players, is that some of them are like, I study too much. Like, I like studying more than I like playing. And that's probably not ideal either, but that mentality of like, you're really excited to learn something, there's something that you're really getting out of that, is something that I feel like has consistently come up within successful poker players.
Yeah, because you have to. I mean, this is not... I guess you could be born with some raw talent in poker, but beyond that, like, everything else is going to be stuff that you gather through learning. It's not something that you can just like download at once and like, okay, all of a sudden I'm the best poker player in the world. Like, raw talent will only take you so far. After that, it's all about your off-table work, what you're actually doing, how you're prioritizing your studying, and making sure you're putting in enough time both between sessions and during sessions. You mentioned the person that kind of leans way too heavy in the study versus play. There are people like that. For most people, it's the exact opposite. But if you do lean in the I really enjoy studying, you have to understand, like, when you're at the table, that's when you get to get in the gauntlet. You get to put to work everything you've been learning between sessions. So you need to be able to find that part just as fun as you find the studying. And if you find play really, really awesome, but you really hate studying, again, it's kind of a perception shift. Like, both of them need to be fun. They're just fun for slightly different reasons.
Yeah. I think I would recommend that, because it sounds like we are kind of the people who defaulted towards enjoying poker study, at least. If you're not that type of person, I would really look at solutions to that problem itself. Is like, how do I make my studying more fun? And if you're just like looking at like preflop ranges and you're like, Jesus, like, I'm just memorizing all this. This is crazy. Like, this isn't fun. Look at something like a trainer, or, there's a trainer within GTO Plus that if you have the right data set, you can put in like basically every flop theoretically and start drilling situations. And, and Poker Snowy is another one that I've heard, I've used personally and other people have used. It's not a perfect solution, but it gets you in there quickly. And you don't have to worry about managing lots of data and solves and computational power. So if I was struggling with it and I really enjoyed playing, getting a trainer set up where you could just like pop in, play 25 hands in the day, maybe drill a specific situation, that should get you going. Or just look for other things that could get you going. Like, maybe you enjoy, I think a lot of people who get coaching just enjoy the interaction with someone, and they're able to kind of make that study fun in that way, or get really motivated by the goal. I'm going to study 1 hour a day, et cetera, something like that. Really figure out the structure of how you can make it fun. Because I think if you're just like, well, it's not fun and I just do it because I don't want to lose, I feel like that's such an uphill battle to fight if you want to be very good at poker.
Yeah, agreed. It has to be fun. And for me personally, like, my most intense study sessions have probably always been with you. Like, I'm thinking back to like college, and then once we moved out to Vegas, like, it was not uncommon to spend hours drilling through a single hand and just kind of letting that conversation unfold and hacking through something like really, really intensely. And I don't know about you, but I'm a massive introvert. I don't consider myself an extrovert in the slightest. So obviously extroverts, I'm assuming, would probably get even more energy from that, from doing like group coaching in some capacity or group study in some capacity. So if that works for you and you're like, I don't want to sit in a room by myself, locked in front of my computer, I do that all day anyway, why the heck do I want to do this? There are other solutions for it. You mentioned the trainers. I think trainers are good, but I think it's easy to kind of use them in a really passive way, and also you're kind of back to playing more so than like actually studying. The biggest thing with study is it has to be active. Like, if you think you're going to put on a pro video and start studying, You're not. Unless you're sitting there and you're actively engaged with it, you're probably taking notes at the same time. Maybe you have Flopzilla up and you're working alongside or a solver or whatever. That's where it's going to be active and things are going to stick much better. The issue is people waste a lot of time studying. They do so very, very poorly, and then nothing sticks. And then they get frustrated and say, well, why should I study? Nothing sticks. Totally fair, makes sense, but chances are you're studying incorrectly. So for someone who's not super jazzed about the idea of jumping into study, what's kind of the first thing you would tell them? So we kind of talked a little bit about perception and the value of it. But beyond that, like, how would you suggest people get started with this?
Yeah, great question. I think you always need to start with a very clear goal, because on the other side, I do see people who get so caught up in playing around with software, and like you said, there's not like an active focused target that they're working towards, and then they're just like, oh, well, I'm trying 4 bet sizes in GTO plus, and like, I'm learning all this sort of very questionably useful stuff. It's not that you couldn't get something out of that theoretically, but if you are looking at 4 bet size in GTO plus and you don't have a preflop range locked in, like, the effectiveness of those things that you were learning is pretty minimal. And you're not sort of stacking your knowledge together in a coherent way, because, like if you're looking at a poker GTO preflop range, or a poker post-flop solution, it's dependent on the preflop range, right? And so one of the things that I think I've done very well, and that's made me a good coach and made me a good player, in fact, is just the fact that I always know what I am trying to learn, and everything that I'm looking at is sort of pointed towards the hypothesis that I have. A good example of this was, I was looking at some hands that we were gonna do for Poker Bank recently, and it was just two 3-bet situations where the flop texture was very different. It was a dry board on with high cards, and then it was a wetter board. It was 8-5-2, the flush draw. And I just wanted to see, like, okay, well, if I look at the 2 c-bet ranges here, I want to understand in a 3-bet pot, and so I was in position 3-betting, I want to understand what I should be c-betting and what changes around. This is a pretty refined idea, but for me, this was really useful. It was a situation that I was running into regularly. From my play, I was seeing it come. I used real hands to these are real hands that I played. And so everything was very targeted. And I was like, okay, I have this question and I have this nice little starting data set. And I just go and I look at them and I'm like, okay, well, what groups of hands checked and bet on each flop? And I just sort of wrote them out. And I think, I guess we'll record this later, but basically I was kind of finding that, like, on one texture, the backdoor flush draws were always checking, which is counterintuitive. Like, we'd be like, oh, well, backdoor flush draws add value, et cetera, et cetera. But I was thinking, oh, in a 3-bet pot, maybe the pot geometry makes it so we need to have hands that we call on the turn with if we check, and these backdoor flush draws with some value or whatever are good. Conversely, on the low board, I was looking at it and I was like, oh, we're checking a lot of ace high. We're checking any strong ace high, including flush draws, which in a 3-bet pot is a little weird, because you're like, oh, you just like flush draw, like bang away. I was like, oh, but we need some showdown values. And so this for me was like, it's a pretty refined idea, and it's just an example of my own study, but like I was able to take away a couple of ideas of like, oh, I should be looking at what type of textures I will want to be showing down ace high on. Lower textures make sense. Keeping the pot controlled, having some, just some showdown value in my check range. And those are ace highs on a low board. It makes the most sense because there's going to be less pairs available for both players. And on this other, dry board or whatever, it's like, oh, these backdoor flush draws are much more important to check because we need a reasonable hand to call on the turn with. And with, like the queen on board, which was what I was looking at, you didn't worry as much about pairs. You just needed equity on the turn. So it's like, very interesting. And these are actually just, I would say, early theories. But like that focus and idea, now I have something that I can look at as I look at hands in the future and to say, oh, like there's this whole other dynamic. And it may even transcend 3-bet pots. It may be applicable into c-bet pots as well. And I have these new ideas that I can play with and extend and help balance my c-betting ranges that I just didn't have before. And for me, that's incredibly practical because when I look at a board and I'm looking at a texture to bet, I am trying to balance my frequencies and I am trying to think about that. That's the level of play that I'm at. And for me, this is really practical because it's just another variable I can take in and look at my c-bet decision. And it's immediately useful. It came from real hands, and I know I'm going to play hands similar to that. And yeah, and I like that versus someone who just goes in and doesn't have that focused goal. So that was, I guess, an advanced example, but I'm sure we can come up with some simpler ones too.
Before we go simpler, so let's keep kind of where we are with that study that you just did. I could hear someone, I can already hear someone, they hear that and they're like, okay, cool, I'm going to go study a hand. They're going to pull a gem out and they're going to massively over-extrapolate it. And all of a sudden, from a single solve or from a single Fobzilla analysis, it's like, well, okay, that's how it worked here, but they're just gonna globally apply it and just massively the wrong ways and get totally punished for it. So how do you balance that part? Obviously, you've been playing and studying for years; it's far easier for you to do it. But how would you suggest someone who's newer to it wouldn't be able to extrapolate the gem properly or maybe understand the gem properly right this moment? Is it just share it on Discord and be like, hey, does this feel like it's in the right ballpark? Does it seem like I'm understanding this concept properly? Is it some extra studying and kind of going down a rabbit hole? Kind of what would you suggest for that person?
Good question. I really think we need to define our goals. And for me, there's kind of a couple steps. So number one, when I'm sort of developing ideas and learning things, is I'm just kind of generating broad data sets. So it's just I just want to kind of show myself and my brain what's possible, and that's kind of, I guess, where maybe the phase I was at when I was doing this exploration is I just needed a couple of examples because I just want to kind of pull out some ideas on what are the trends and the hand groupings, I would say. And I knew that it wouldn't necessarily be directly accurate, but I would be adding a variable to my own knowledge that would maybe help me better define my goal of how I want to handle my 3-bet, my c-bet frequency in a 3-bet pot, right? That was kind of the overall goal. So the next step for me would be okay, I've kind of generated ideas. Now I have to bring it in and create a really focused plan on how exactly I'm going to c-bet when I'm making a c-bet decision in a 3-bet pot at the table, in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, etc. And that's the step that I think a lot of people get lost on is, okay, we're studying, we're learning, we're getting all these cool concepts. Now I need a plan. How am I going to use it? This is what I know. These are some ideas that are maybe being introduced. What am I going to do with that? The most concrete example I can think of is just preflop ranges. If you have our, pro GTO preflop ranges or our core ranges, it's a really easy step. Just memorize them and learn them, right?
Yep.
And use them, I should say. Go out, use them, see what happens. And, preflop ranges are just the perfect example because for some reasons, people still do not follow GTO preflop ranges pretty much ever. So you're finding people with ranges that are just completely outside of it. People, I would say, don't even have... What percentage do you think of small stakes players have an exact preflop range where this is what I'm doing, right?
An exact range?
Ooh. Yes,
If we're talking anything under 100 NL online, I mean, maybe 1.5%? Maybe?
Yeah. I think so too.
Live players, I'd say it's much closer to 0, even for just basic ranges.
Yeah. Oh, live players, nothing. Yeah. Even the best players, I don't think.
Yeah.
They just everyone wants to use discretion, and I suspect everyone wants to just play more hands. Hey everyone, this is just a quick reminder: if you need help getting started in poker, figuring out what to do, what ranges to play, we have Core available. Core is the most structured poker course that you can get. Literally walks you through everything you need to know from the ground up, each concept, ranges, how all that works, how you need to think about that, literally a step-by-step progression into making you essentially an expert poker player. And all that is available for just $5 to start, $5 a week after that. And yeah, I mean, it's what a beginner poker player would need. And we've spent the time to meticulously understand that. We have beginners who come in and ask questions, and we've integrated that, and those questions are available as well. So I think it's really the best thing that you could do to get started in poker. So if that sounds like the type of thing that you would like, please go to redchippoker.com/core.
It's a nice, easy excuse to say, I'm going to skip the GTO thing that's going to force me to understand this to, I felt like it, or there's this good variable over here.
Yes.
Whatever works.
and so, and how many players are giving up huge edges in their game and not implementing that? So it's just that's what I think about when I think about study, is just that implementation step is critical. If you're going out there watching these advanced videos, watching this high stakes plays, but you don't have a way to take an idea and implement it in your game consistently 100% of the time, right? I realize, there's variables that change things around, and it's not always an exact application. But to say yourself in the average situation, I'm going to do this 99% of the time. Who does that? No one does it. And that is such a powerful, just doing that, I think you could make a living at in small stakes, almost no doubt. If you are able to just say, go ahead, take a basic c-bet strategy, a basic preflop strategy, copy them exactly, and implement it, you would most likely be able to beat small stakes for a livable rate. I think that's how infrequent it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's when I hear people studying, getting into these advanced ideas, I'm like, I wonder if you have a preflop range.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, as always, go back to the beginning, go back to the root, go back to the starting point of it all, and preflop is obviously that for poker. The other thing, you mentioned people watching a video and, pulling something from it and trying to apply it. Maybe it's an advanced video, fine. The first thing that comes to mind is how often we hear someone watching some advanced video, doesn't matter who it's by, and they try to implement it just straight out at their limit. And they don't do a lot of thinking about what the play is doing, why it might be working, why it might be advised, when it might not be advised. So the first thing when I'm trying to understand and learn something new is I try to understand the biggest picture possible. What is the game at hand, essentially? What are the rules of the game? And then I start operating within that. And as I'm going further down, I'm trying to understand, okay, what are the variables? My brain works essentially as a nonstop if-then statement. If this, then do that. And if this variable is included, then add that to the formula. And when it comes to poker, it can't ever be so simple as, go watch somebody 4-bet and all of a sudden you're just going to start 4-betting everything, right? Because you're going to miss the whole piece. You're going to miss how 4-betting functions. What's the point of it? You're going to miss what assumptions are being made about the person that's 3-betting and what stack depth is and how that factors in and any sort of history and all these kind of things. So there's all these different variables that are built upon something as simple as 4-betting. So ranges, I guess, are the one thing that you can kind of just sit there and straight out memorize. And easy to memorize, easy to implement, no problem. Anything beyond that is going to have to mean understanding what goes into making this play well, and also what goes into this play not working out. So often you see people that are just I someone above me who plays higher than I do said to 3-bet a lot. Okay, why? Because if you can't just give a starter answer to that why, you're screwed. And that's where you actually need to start prioritizing your study. Because otherwise you're just throwing more junk on your plate without any understanding of what your plate is or how the heck you're going to use any of it. Just a hodgepodge of nonsense.
Yeah, I think this is why we're such big advocates for just change one aspect of your game at a time. And you can still change your game very quickly. But for the next session, if you want to 3-bet more, just focus on just 3-betting more, getting used to what happens in a 3-bet pot. I'm a big fan of actually just 3-betting more in position to start, because those out of position pots are real tricky and can generate a lot of mistakes when people play too splashy, I think.
Well,
And
it simplifies you two ways, right? It simplifies you because you're going to start three betting more. That's great. You're only going to do so in position, so it's negating some of these extra spots. And it also means all of your C bets and three bet pots are going to be in position. So
Yep.
you make your life like a billion times easier, and then you can start working in, okay, maybe I'm going to start trying to look for a couple extra three bets from the big blind, and then maybe the small. And then you're adding more to it. So it's this stacked approach rather than just dump it all on at once. I'm going to three bet like a maniac this session. Well, that's going to be a very
And then you're
expensive
just
session.
lost.
Exactly. And then
Yeah,
you're frustrated,
and
then
then
you're
you're just
confused,
lost.
then you don't want to study anymore because, well, I tried last time and that went poorly. It's just, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yes. And I see that all the time is just the frustration when you've sort of learned some new things and you're trying to implement it. It's, I think it's so important to have that stack of priority. And I think we've been talking about this a lot recently, but like the most important things in the game, what is your opening range? What are your three bet ranges? How do you see bet, right? If you are able to lock those things down and a reasonably efficient way, you're already in the top 1% of any small stakes game and you can make a lot of money. Yep. Just doing those things. It doesn't have to be super complicated. The other areas of your game can be just about right. And because of the frequency that those spots occur, it's incredibly powerful. And so, if we're going to someone newer, like the thing I would say is just like really try and come up with the simplest plan for those three areas of the game that you can get into place as fast as possible.
Yep.
Because it will get you a level of progress and feeling for what a real strategy looks like and how all those different areas operate in the game. You're like, I think before you have that, you're like almost not even gaining experience because you're playing a different game, right? When you're calling too much, when you're not three betting enough, it's like your ranges are all different. Like everything's going to feel different. People playing against you are going to react differently. When you start putting it all together, even if it's not perfect, even if you're just kind of close, it is a very, very powerful feeling. And all of a sudden, all the hands that you're experiencing are like real scenarios that you will need to balance and optimize versus like you called jacks too tightly and now you have an overly strong call range, but your three bet range is like super nutted and you're not, everything is out of balance. Everything isn't like real in a sense. And so getting those basics in place, I think it's the biggest priority for everyone. If you're at a place where you're like, oh, I'm spending like hours in GTO plus, but you don't have those things, it's like try and get there as fast as possible. Use the training, use whatever, pre-flop ranges you can get. Just get to that point where you're playing the real game. Then the refinements start to get incredibly valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what else kind of should we hack into this subject? I feel like we could probably go on for hours and hours and hours talking about this, right? Because we could talk about, okay, not just the what should you be studying, but also like how to study and also how to gamify things and how to trick your brain to actually perceive enjoying study, even though most people don't actually do it. Where do you want to go with it? I could see us going lots of different directions, but you pick.
I would say one of the biggest questions I get is just, and one of the things people spend energy on is, what are the tools and trainings that they need to purchase? And so that is a big question. So, obviously we are a training site. We have built Core, I think, to be the source of like just getting those basics in place, right? That is the intent of Core. It is very, it's very affordable at $5. That is kind of the point of that. It is not, like Core is not for refining your 3-bet C-bet range, right? It is for getting you a basic understanding of how to play all aspects of the game. So obviously I think that is important. Number 2, I would say, is you can get for free, something like Equilab or I think there's a non-pro version of Flopzilla, etc. And just start understanding like how to run, an all-in scenario, how to run a pre-flop range against each other, etc. Even just using the 13 by 13 matrix hand chart, very powerful for a lot of people, right? Most people, or no one knows what that is before they start looking at these pre-flop ranges, right? Yep. So, it's also fine, I think, to scale up your software knowledge. And then the next one I would say that I love, that it's definitely more advanced, but just getting GTO plus, it has a trainer involved. It can involve some setup, but there are some very good YouTube tutorials on it, and it will serve you in the long term in poker. And it's a great cost point at $75. That's one of the first investments I would make, because all of a sudden you're going to be able to put a hand in directly. You can just literally copy and paste your hand in. You can copy and paste preflop ranges in from core or from our pro GTO ranges. Those are great for this. And all of a sudden you have like a general, this is how this situation goes that you can kind of rely on, which I think as a beginner, just like getting that first solve in and being like, oh, like, whoa, I would have never thought of doing that with that hand, or like, I didn't realize you would need to be betting the flop that often, or like, how often am I betting the flop? All these kind of questions that come up from just seeing like what a real solution looks like, I think is incredibly powerful, and it's fairly cost effective. So,
yep. One clarifier there, Flopzilla is a paid program. There's no free one. They do have like a 7-day free trial for it. But essentially this is one of those where if you're going to take poker seriously at all, spending a little bit on software, in my opinion, is 100% worthwhile. I mean, it was so valuable that even when I switched over to Mac only for a small period of time, I still got a VM so I could run Windows on my Mac, so I could still use tools that I was used to. It's because the Mac ecosystem, it still blows my mind that the Mac ecosystem doesn't have really anything better than like Poker Cruncher available. And Poker Cruncher is great, but like the stuff we can do with Windows software, I don't know why it's so much better, but I'm very grateful that I have a Windows machine. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But
I do think the advanced Mac people can get like Wine and things to get Windows programs. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm using Parallels to get it working, and there's a slight like quarter-second delay, but shy of that, I'm a very, very happy camper.
Yeah.
But essentially, like, a little software goes a long way. You don't have to buy everything. You don't have to buy every single training program. You don't have to buy every single course. In fact, a lot of the people that do are really just doing so to pad their library and feel better that, hey, I have this or I've studied that, and really you didn't study it. They may have just looked at it once or twice. So again, there's a big difference between like active study and stuff. So whatever you get, sink into it hard. So if that's software, get used to running some sims in GTO Plus. Get used to doing some analysis with Flopzilla. Flopzilla is about half the cost of GTO Plus. So do whatever works for you and what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish right at that moment. And the big thing is, the newer you are to it when you're using tools, don't try to do what Chris said earlier and get the full extrapolation, because you're just not going to have the context for doing that kind of extrapolation yet. Rather, just take a little note. What did I learn here? Take notice when a frequency is really high or the solver suggests a really low frequency. And when you do that enough, you're going to start stacking and identifying the patterns much easier. Don't think you're going to identify a pattern early when you have no context for what a pattern may or may not even look like in this game.
Yeah.
I just see people like over-extrapolate like the most bananas things, and they make really weird strategic decisions because of it, and then they put themselves in hell, and like 6 months later their game is just like just mired in nonsense because they've just added all this crap in there. And again, it was well intended, right? They were studying, they just unfortunately over-extrapolated the gem, and that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually that's a really good use of training, is to kind of balance what you're seeing in the solver, because the unfortunate situation is that if you put like, some weird hands in your preflop range in a solver, like it can drastically change how things run. And like we were actually talking about one of these hands in the Discord earlier where someone was dealing with an ace 3-3 paired board with a flush draw. And I think Poker Snowy had donked out, and they were like, "Oh, this doesn't seem right." Like I ran it in a solver, and they're never donking here. I was like, "Well, it's not actually implausible that probably a low percentage of the time, a preflop range with say a lot of 3x in the out of position player's flat call range would donk there, and have like a bluffing range here because it's just actually a better board for them." And yeah, that was just a tricky spot. Like, how would you know that? And pairing that with like having a community that you can talk to and check ideas and be like, is this crazy? Or like, can anyone explain this? Or having some training solutions like Pro and Core where you can go and double check things like that. I think that's the right balance, is like, yeah, you want to be getting some experience with solvers. You want to be getting some experience with what a practical applied strategy looks like. And to start, you just need to take all that, get some basic ideas, and get some basic 3-betting, pre-flop ranges, etc. going. And yeah, I mean, poker, this is kind of the beauty of poker, is that it is a complicated game. And because of that, I think people are just always at different levels. And that's the weird part about creating poker training, is that, you know, we create things and we're like, well, people want this more advanced idea, but we have to make it accessible to a beginner. And it's a very tricky balance that I think people may not appreciate, is that, like, you know, everyone's coming with this different perspective. You know, like, my perspective on the game right now is, how do I take GTO and exploitative play and mash them together? I don't feel like a lot of players are doing that as much. Yep. Some of the better Zoom, like 500 PokerStars Zoom players, I think, are really thinking that way, but not a lot of players thinking about that. They don't talk about it. Maybe it's still in like the secret mode where we don't talk about the best strategies, but it's there's understand that there's that challenge is intrinsic to poker, and everyone's dealing with it. And you know, I think that's part of the fun of the game, is that, like, the game actually isn't solved yet now, as of now. And there's all these juicy gems out there. It is super fun, but remember, you want to go to the table and make money in the short term as well as the long term. So don't get too theoretical, and keep it applied, and have that goal in mind when you're sitting down to study.
100%. And I'll just wrap up with kind of one final thing, and just kind of piggybacking on something you said there, is remember, most of your opponents aren't studying, right? And there's just so much to study in this game. So it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time, effort, and applied focus to really start generating good things in the long run for your win rate, for making better decisions in general. The whole goal is not to study out poker for thousands and thousands and thousands of hours before playing a hand. It's just to make sure you make studying part of your routine, so that way in between sessions you're getting stronger, and at the table you're making decisions faster, and you're also going to find yourself tiring out less, because you're going to have to use less brain power to make decisions that are kind of more commonplace. Like you mentioned, the preflop ranges and 3-betting and c-betting and 3-bet pots. Like, if you have a lot of that stuff kind of like already downloaded in your psyche, and you're not having to waste a bunch of brain power saying, oh, okay, well, what am I supposed to do in this exact board? Okay, well, I've never seen this spot before. No, like, you have some basic idea from your analysis. And if you don't, if you run into one of those weird spots or you face a weird action, it happens. Take it home and study it. And the one thing I'll suggest when you're studying a hand, try to study it a couple different ways. Study it from the way that it actually happened, you know, analyze the exact spot you found yourself in, and then also analyze it from your opponent's point of view. And think about how you might exploit you from the opposite side of the table. That can be very, very eye-opening. And in fact, I've developed like massive strategies off the back of, how would I make somebody else hate life in this spot? Especially when most of your players are playing very basic taggy. I mean, you can figure out like 5 ways to make their life hell across a couple different streets. Yeah, life gets pretty easy, to say the least. And again, we're back to having a lot of extra energy at the table that you can spend to pay more attention, or you can spend to try to maybe find a slightly better size in a certain spot. Like, just don't beat yourself up over it. You're not going to learn poker overnight, and no one's expecting you to, but most of your opponents also aren't putting in much work. So if you put in a little, it can really go a long, long way for you.
Yeah, I want to add to that real quick. The study and the tools that we have available now are so powerful compared to what we had back in the day. So, like, I feel like a lot of people who play poker now learned poker 5, 10, 15 years ago. Okay, that was when the poker boom was. That's just kind of how things are. In my experience, and sample size, whatever, like, the games that I play in 2021, my edge is bigger than it was back in 2008. And I think the reason for that is because of the study and the tools that I have available. And I don't study that hard. I'm not doing anything crazy. Like, I think the fact that I probably do a couple hours a week blows anyone out of the water, you know, in my average game. But, like, just understand this is a crazy advantage you can get. And everyone who's going in there and who's just kind of like trying to do the approximate right thing that they've kind of learned over time, when you study, you get the potential to win at win rates, the highest possible win rates that I think have been available in poker ever, because that disparity still exists. And like, it's still, like we said, almost no one's implementing the basic strategies. What percentage do you think have even like owned GTO plus, right? Which is like, or any solver, which is basically an essential tool. It's like a fraction of that. And then anyone who's like, what percentage even know how to use it beyond the basics?
Correct.
It's, I don't know, 1,000 people.
Tops. Yeah, tops.
Maybe it's more like 10,000, but like, they're not at your table very often. So, it's just keep in mind how powerful that is. And it's the advantages we're talking about that are available in your game are as good as they have ever been, in my opinion. I'm sure there'll be a lot of disagreement with that, but yeah.
I don't want to disagree with that, because when we're going to sound like old men here, but back in our day when we were learning poker with pretty much pen and paper and maybe an Excel sheet if we were lucky. I mean, and Poker Stove, but essentially like Poker Stove
and Notepad,
right? Which is like the functional equivalent of just using Equilab today. And people nowadays have no idea how much easier their lives are. But anyway, again, old man talk right there. But yeah, like back then, everyone played really, really terrible, but they were just too fishy, right? So there's just a lot of like overly loose calling, which meant it's very easy to generate a lot of value, but bluffing was a little bit more tricky. And now, when we have all these tools, and we have all this, training that's out there, you see a lot more people that understand, like, okay, I should not be overly fishy. I should make sure I fold here. I shouldn't be calling too much. Well, that's actually better for your win rate, because most of your range is going to be dumpy combos that would love to get a profitable bluff through. So, yeah, if you're looking for those spots where you can refine your frequencies and find all these extra bluff spots, I mean, your win rate can do some very, very cool things in a very short amount of time. But it does take some study, does take some effort, and I think I'll just end it here, but also invite you, if you haven't already joined our Discord, to make sure to jump on in, redchippoker.com/Discord, to jump in and essentially say hello. If you're studying some stuff yourself right now and you're like, does this sound good? Does this sound crazy? Throw it in there. We'd love to talk it out with you, see what's going on, and also hear any hands that you're looking at in your own game as well. Any last minute thoughts from you, Chris?
No, I think we covered it. Just think how fun it is when you really master these things and you're the tough opponent. I mean, to me, that's the most satisfying thing at the poker table.
It really is. There's nothing more satisfying than just not being confused a ton of the time. And I think, if nothing else, looking at studying through that lens of like, I don't want to feel like the idiot at the table. I don't want to feel confused this entire damn session. The more you can mitigate those confusions, the happier you're going to be, the more profitable you're going to be. So again, definitely get in there, do some studying, check us out on Discord. Love to have a chit chat with you. And yeah, I think that'll wrap it up for today. So thank you so much for hanging out, Chris. Thank you so much for listening today. If you need anything at all, let us know. Otherwise, as always, good luck out there and happy grinding.
And guys, before you head out, just a quick reminder, if you want our beginner poker course, it's redchippoker.com/core. $5 to start. You can basically get everything you need for that $5 if you hustle that week. Otherwise, just take your pace and it's like $5 a week. So check it out, redchippoker.com/core.